Glenn Hall with The Blaze, and I'm here with Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. And I'm going to jump right in with the hardball question. So folks, think of you as an up-and-coming star, or perhaps you think of yourself already as a star in this party, but you brought some new ideology in here, and I'm curious as to your sense at this convention whether that ideology is prevalent or as prevalent as you'd like it to be.
We worked hard on the platform this year, and we got a lot of our ideas into the platform. One of my dad's signature issues has been audit the Fed. That'll become part of the platform for the first time. One of the things I've been talking a lot about is that we shouldn't have domestic drone surveillance without a warrant from a judge. If they think you're committing a crime, by all means, talk to a judge, get a warrant, and then they can use a drone. But without a judge's warrant, we don't want drones crisscrossing our cities, and that's now part of our platform.
So the civil liberties side of this being fought hard at the Republican convention.
Absolutely. Republicans have always been good defenders of the Second Amendment, but I tell people you can't keep your guns and you can't keep your Second Amendment if you don't have the Fourth Amendment. Republicans have sometimes not been as good at preventing illegal or unreasonable search and seizure in your house. We have new language that supports the Fourth Amendment also in the platform.
So you mentioned your father, Ron Paul, and I just wanted to sort of ask you a question or two about his legacy and whether you feel it's your privilege to carry on that legacy.
Well, I don't think anybody really can get credit and say, oh, I'm going to be the new leader of the Ron Paul movement, but I can tell you there will be a nice video talking about the last 30 years or so that he's been active in politics. I think he has a lasting effect. There are hundreds of delegates out there that are avid Ron Paul fans. The chairman of the party in Iowa was a Ron Paul supporter. The chairman in Nevada was a Ron Paul supporter, or at least the head of the Clark County was. So he has a significant influence out there. And I think the idea that we will talk about not only auditing the Fed, but maybe auditing the Pentagon, and talk about the fact that not every dollar spent on military spending is wise or well spent. And I think that's thanks to the ideas that my father's brought up through the years.
And what do you think about the deficit reduction efforts and what needs to be done in that front, and how will you be fighting that fight in the Senate?
You have to have a balanced budget. It has to balance within a finite time. I tell people I will not support any budget that balances over 20 or 30 years. I may not be alive in 28 years, so I'm not supporting any budget that takes 28 years to balance. I will only support something that balances within a finite time. The balanced budget amendment that we proposed, Mike Lee and I worked on it and others, says you have to balance in 5 years. So really, that's the time frame we should be talking about, and the conservatives in the Senate, myself included, will be telling Republicans, if you take over, that's fine. You want us to vote for your budget? Make sure it balances, because I'm not voting for it if it doesn't balance within a finite time.
Do you think there is a rift inside the Republican Party between the Tea Party ideology and those things that you're representing here and sort of traditional ideology? Where's that going?
I think it's always a tug of war back and forth with everything. It's not so much a rift. I think everybody out there, whether you supported Mitt Romney from the beginning or Santorum or Ron Paul, they probably agree on 90% of the issues. We disagree on 5 to 10% of the issues, and that's healthy. And so we tug and pull for the issues that we agree on or disagree on. But it doesn't mean there's so much disagreement that we're not in the same camp. We're all Republicans because we think the Republican Party is the party of limited government, of obeying the original intention of the Constitution.
And what about the issue of the new rules that create such a kerfuffle today, especially among Ron Paul supporters themselves? What's your take on all of that?
Well, our idea of the way the party should be run is consistent with our idea of the way the country should be run. We think rights and powers should mostly be held at a local level, same way with parties. So if you're the Iowa caucus, you should be able to make the rules for the Iowa caucus, and the National Republican Party shouldn't be able to tell Iowa how to run their caucus. Iowa's had a caucus for quite a while. Iowa's proud of it. They're proud of being early on in the primary process. Nobody should be allowed to tell them from the national level what to do, and I think they backed off on that rule, so there was a bit of a compromise in what came forward at the end.
We've seen a lot of interesting shifts at this convention. One of the ones that we noted is growing regional powers. Beyond the power base of the South and the West, we've seen the Midwest coming on board, the Northeast even coming back on board. What do you think it takes to build out a stronger Republican base across the entire nation?
I think what you're going to have to do, and this is where the Ron Paul or Libertarian Republicans come in, there are several parts of the country we aren't winning at all. Nobody's projecting that Romney has a chance in California, probably not in Oregon or Washington. New England, we win almost nothing in New England. So maybe we ought to reconsider what our approach is, that maybe accepting these Libertarian Republicans who might be a little bit different on some issues, maybe a little bit less aggressive on foreign policy, maybe a little bit more tolerant of people's personal lifestyles, that maybe that kind of thing might attract more moderates, independents in the areas we're not winning. So I think the Republican Party ought to have a strategy as to how to not only incorporate Ron Paul people, but find the best and the best spokesmen from the movement, get them to run in states where we're not winning.
Well, it sounds like you're speaking about a little bit tighter fiscal policy, but perhaps a little bit more open social policy?
A little bit, in the sense that it doesn't really have to be so extreme that people are talking about legalization of drugs, but I think what we should talk about is if your teenage son gets caught with it, do we want him in jail for 20 years? Some of the rules can put a teenager in jail for 20 years, mandatory sentence, no discretion from the judge. I'm starting to talk about that in the Senate, and I think the mood of the country is changing on that. Maybe not towards legalization, but maybe towards a more reasonable approach to addiction as a health condition, as opposed to something we want to put people in jail for long-term sentences with hardened criminals.
Circling back a little bit to gun control efforts, we talked about that a little bit before on the Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment. What do you think needs to be done in the wake of all of these shootings that we've been seeing lately? There have been one after another in recent weeks. It raises the call for more gun control. What do you think is the right answer there?
Well, I think we have 300 and some odd million people, and there's some mental illness out there. And personally, I think that there's no way to police all of the mentally ill people. I think there should be ways to help them and ways to try to separate them from society if they're violent. But ultimately, a lot of the shootings, and I know people don't want to hear this, but if there were someone in the movie theater or someone at the school who could defend themselves, sometimes the shootings would stop a lot sooner. Doesn't mean it's perfect, and it doesn't mean that there would be no killings. But, there was a shooting at a church in Colorado about a month before, and there was a off-duty police officer who shot the assailant that killed one person. It was a church full of 100 people, and you might have had 100 deaths had not one person been armed. So I think guns as a form of self-defense are a good idea.
Okay, so let me just jump in one last question. Looking ahead to your future, do you see yourself as a presidential candidate down the road?
That's a tough question. I thought we weren't going to ask that. Now, I don't know. I mean, a lot of it depends on who wins this time around, and a lot of it depends on what happens and, how my Senate career unfolds over the next couple of years. But we're going to stay active. We want to push the debate, whether Republicans in the White House or Democrats in the White House. One thing I will say is that I will fight for a balanced budget, and I will fight for limited government no matter who's there.